Have you ever noticed how strange people get when you say, "Honestly, I like being alone"? They tilt their head a little. Maybe they laugh and say, "Oh, you just haven't found your people yet." Or worse, they look at you with that quiet concern, like you just admitted something tragic, as if enjoying your own company is a problem waiting to be fixed. But what if it isn't? What if the urge to be alone isn't loneliness at all, but something deeper, something psychological, something your brain is doing on purpose? If you're someone who genuinely enjoys being alone, not in a sad way, not in a nobody texted me way, but in a calm, grounding, almost relieving way, this video's for you. And even if you're not, stay with me, because by the end of this, you might start seeing solitude very differently. Let me start with a simple scene. Imagine it's been a long day. Messages, noise, expectations, conversations that never quite end, and finally you close the door behind you. Silence. No performance, no reacting, no explaining yourself, just you. And instead of feeling empty, you feel lighter, like your nervous system just exhaled. For a lot of people, that moment feels uncomfortable. Silence feels loud. Being alone feels like something is missing, but for others, it feels like coming home. Psychology has a lot to say about why that difference exists. One of the biggest misconceptions is that people who enjoy being alone are antisocial or shy or broken in some subtle way. But research tells a very different story. Many people who seek solitude aren't running away from others. They're returning to themselves. Their brains are simply wired to process the world internally before or instead of processing it out loud. Think of the mind like a battery. For some people, interaction charges it. Conversation, movement, stimulation, laughter. For others, that same stimulation drains it, not because they dislike people, but because their brains are doing more work during social interaction. They're reading expressions, tracking tone, filtering noise, thinking deeply. Alone time isn't avoidance, it's recharging. Psychologists often talk about introversion here, but that word has been flattened into a stereotype. Introversion doesn't mean quiet or awkward. It means your nervous system is more sensitive to stimulation. Your brain notices more, processes more, and because of that, it needs more downtime to reset. People who enjoy being alone often have minds that run deep rather than wide. Instead of skimming the surface of many experiences, they dive. They replay conversations. They connect ideas. They notice patterns. And solitude gives those thoughts space to breathe. There's also something else happening, something more emotional. When you're alone, you're not being mirrored by anyone else. No subtle pressure to adjust your tone, your humor, your opinions. You don't have to be agreeable. You don't have to be on. That freedom is incredibly soothing for people who are highly self-aware. In psychology, self-awareness is a double-edged sword. It can make social situations richer, but also heavier. When you're very aware of yourself, of others, of dynamics and subtext, interaction can feel like multitasking at an emotional level. Alone time removes that layer. You're not managing impressions, you're just existing. This is why many people who enjoy being alone also enjoy routine, quiet hobbies or creative work. Writing, walking, cleaning, thinking. These activities offer a gentle rhythm that lets the mind wander without being pulled in 10 directions at once. Neuroscientists have found that during quiet, low-stimulation moments, the brain's default mode network becomes active. This is the network associated with reflection, memory, identity, and meaning. In other words, when you're alone and doing nothing, your brain is actually doing something very important. It's integrating your experiences, making sense of your life, asking questions you don't even realize you're asking. That's one reason solitude has been so central to philosophers, artists, monks, scientists, and thinkers throughout history. From ancient Stoics to modern writers, time alone wasn't seen as isolation, it was seen as alignment, a way to hear your own thoughts without interference. But here's where things get tricky. We live in a culture that equates constant connection with health. If you're busy, social, reachable, you're doing life right. If you step back, you must be lonely or depressed or missing out. That narrative creates a lot of unnecessary shame for people who genuinely thrive in solitude. And shame changes how solitude feels. When you start questioning your preference, alone time stops being peaceful and starts feeling like something you need to justify. You tell yourself, I should go out more. I should want more people around. Something must be wrong with me. But psychology suggests the opposite. People who are comfortable being alone often have a strong internal anchor. They're less dependent on external validation to regulate their emotions. They don't need constant feedback to feel okay. That doesn't mean they don't value relationships. It means their sense of self isn't outsourced. In fact, studies have shown that people who enjoy solitude tend to have higher emotional regulation. They're better at sitting with their feelings without immediately distracting themselves. They don't panic in silence. They don't need noise to avoid their thoughts. And that's a skill, not a flaw. Of course, this doesn't mean solitude is always easy. Sometimes being alone brings up uncomfortable thoughts, old memories, existential questions. But people who enjoy being alone often learn to see those moments not as threats, but as signals. Something in the mind wants attention, and instead of drowning it out, they listen. There's also a subtle independence that develops here. When you spend time alone, you get to know yourself without an audience. You learn what you actually like, not what gets approval. You notice your own rhythms, your own pace. Over time, that builds quiet confidence. That confidence doesn't shout. It doesn't need to prove anything. It's the kind that says, I'm okay with myself. And interestingly, that often makes relationships healthier, not weaker. When you don't need people to fill a void, you can choose them freely. You can connect without clinging. Now, let's address an important distinction. Enjoying being alone is not the same as being isolated. Solitude is chosen. Isolation is imposed. One is nourishing, the other is draining. People who enjoy being alone still need connection. They just prefer it in smaller doses, deeper conversations, and more intentional ways. They'd rather have one meaningful conversation than 10 surface-level ones. They'd rather sit in silence with someone they trust than shout over noise with strangers. Their social energy isn't absent, it's concentrated. And that concentration can be misunderstood. Quiet people are often labeled as distant or uninterested, when in reality, they're observing, thinking, feeling. They're not disengaged, they're just internally focused. There's also a creativity angle here that's worth mentioning. Solitude gives the brain permission to play. Without external input, ideas collide, memories resurface, imagination stretches. That's why so many creative breakthroughs happen in the shower, on walks, late at night, moments when you're alone and not trying. Psychologically, this is when the mind enters a state of diffuse thinking. Not linear, not goal-driven, just open. And for people who enjoy being alone, that state feels natural, comforting, alive. So if you're someone who loves your alone time, who feels clearer after being by yourself, who doesn't fear silence, understand this. Your brain isn't broken. It's tuned differently. You're not avoiding life. You're processing it. And if you're someone who doesn't enjoy being alone, that's okay too. The goal isn't to become someone else. The goal is understanding. Because once you understand why you feel the way you do, you stop fighting yourself. Maybe the real problem isn't that some people enjoy being alone. Maybe it's that we've forgotten how valuable that can be. In a world that never stops talking, choosing silence can be an act of strength, of clarity, of self-respect. So the next time you find yourself craving solitude, don't rush to label it. Sit with it. Notice what your mind does when no one is watching. There might be more wisdom there than you expect. And if this resonated with you, if you saw yourself somewhere in this reflection, let me know in the comments. I read them more than you think. Subscribe if you want to keep exploring the psychology behind everyday human experiences. And until next time, take care of your mind. Sometimes the best way to do that is simply to be alone with it.